We start today with chapter 1 of our book, which is intended to provide a framework, a general set of definitions, and a sort of big picture of what we are going to explore in more detail in the next weeks. So first of all, of course, the first question that I would like to answer with you is, what is international business? Why do we need an international management course? What should we expect to be different in an international management compared to a management course? Well, of course, what I usually tell my students is that to some extent the international word in international business or international management is kind of useless at this point of time. It's kind of, superfluous, because any activity, any business activity, any business operation today has some sort of international aspect. There is an international aspect in the way every company interacts with consumers. There is an international dimension of our product. There is at least one international relation in the supply chain that we use to generate our final product, okay? So basically, international is any business operation today. But if we really want to give a definition of what we mean by international business, we could say that this is the study of those transactions, very different types of transactions, that occur crossing the borders of different countries, that take place, again, across national borders. Of course, these transactions, as all transactions that we deal with in our courses, are meant to satisfy the needs of either individual consumers, like me and you, or the needs of other companies or other organizations. So, as you will realize, there are a number of very diverse organizations, actors, individual people that every day involve in international business transactions. Now, of course, if we are willing to at least give a first classification of international business transactions, we could distinguish between what we call international trade and what is more general of the transactions of international companies. The latter include many other types of transactions, and the latter will represent a very big part of the content, of the theoretical content of this course. But let's start with international trade, because international trade is to some extent the most classical manifestation of international business. As you can see, as is written in this slide, and as I'm sure you also know already, international trade is based on exporting and importing. It's based on the idea that goods and services that are generated, produced in one particular location can then be sold, or both, by consumers or firms that operate in different locations across borders. Okay? So that's very easy, and I'm sure that so far in your academic path, you have already realized how important is the opportunities that companies have to look behind and look beyond the borders of their own country to search for suppliers or for customers that may be located elsewhere. This generates a lot of different opportunities that looking just within the national borders of our home country, of our domestic environment, sometimes is not able to offer. Okay? And you also know that international trade is a very important engine of economic growth. And that international trade flows have been increasing dramatically over time. As you can see here, the global export flows have changed from about $4 trillion in 1990 to about $23 trillion in 2014. This gives you an idea of the extent to which the international business transactions have been exploding through the last decades. And this is really what it makes extremely crucial to understand what's specific of this type of transactions, what we need to know in addition to what we already know when we deal with an international environment. Okay? So this is, as I say, the first thing that comes to our mind that when we try to imagine this world of international business. It's trade. All of us have had an experience with buying from an international company, so at least as consumers, we have an idea of the opportunities that international business offer. But of course, there is another world, and we will try to deal with this world and with the strategic decisions of this world, that is also an important driver of international business transaction. As this is the world and this is the network of international companies, or what we will also define and call in the next weeks multinational companies. We should stop a little bit on the idea of international companies. We should spend some time to discuss international companies because it's not very easy to provide a very clear and systematic definition of international companies or multinational companies. Because in the past, companies relied on international transactions like import and export just as individuals, just as us. Okay? And over time, these transactions, this, I would say one-shot transaction to gain access to one particular supplier that is located abroad or one particular target segment that is located abroad, over time, these transactions have become more and more systematic and have basically stimulated companies to engage with what we call foreign direct investment. What is foreign direct investment? Do you have any idea? Have you heard about foreign direct investment so far? In previous courses? Any of you? No? Have you heard about foreign subsidiaries or foreign affiliates? I guess so, right? Do you have an idea of what is a foreign subsidiary? You're not required to know, right? Just try and guess.
It's part of a company that's established on another country different from the country which it is based in.
Okay, very good, very good. So your colleague says that a foreign subsidiary is a unit, is an organizational unit that is part of a larger company, but it is physically based in a different location, in a country that differs from what we call the home country of this larger firm. And that's exactly what a foreign subsidiary is, what a foreign affiliate is. And foreign direct investment is the entry mode that companies use when establish these foreign subsidiaries, these foreign affiliates. So whenever a company establishes a foreign subsidiary abroad, we can say that this company has undertaken a foreign direct investment, which is a very advanced type of internationalization, okay? Export, we could say, is just the first step. Export, import, I would say international trade transactions are the first step through which companies become international. But after this, companies can involve more and more in much more sophisticated type of international strategies, and foreign direct investment is one of this. Now, let's imagine, just for a few seconds, what a company that has very different foreign subsidiaries abroad does in order to exchange goods or services within the company itself. So imagine you have a company, an Italian company, okay? And this company has a foreign subsidiary in Spain and a foreign subsidiary in Brazil, okay? Now, as you can imagine, the Italian company that we call the headquarter, okay, the parent company of this larger international group, carries out a number of transactions with the foreign subsidiaries based in Spain and with the foreign subsidiary based in Brazil. And so what we can certainly observe is that even within the context of multinational firms, of firms whose activities, whose operation cross the country borders, there are a number of international transactions going on. So import and export are part and are also induced by the activities that international companies, multinational companies develop within their own organizational boundaries, okay? So as we will see, as we move forward in our analysis of the international business environment, multinational firms are responsible of a very important portion of this international trade relations and transactions that we can observe and that, as we have seen, have been growing a lot through the last decades. So companies, international companies, that in addition to exporting or importing, also have their operations based in many different countries, are very important in driving international business transactions, because even before bringing their products to the final markets, they already exchange components, raw materials, services within the boundaries of their own organization. Okay, so that's very important. It's very important to know that when we talk about international business transactions, we refer to very classical import-export activities, but we also refer to all the activities that are carried out across borders by this very important category of firms that are international or multinational firms. And when I previously referred to the difficulty of defining international companies, I was referring basically to the fact that while in the past we had companies that just interacted with foreign markets with import and export activities, now we also have much more sophisticated kind of transactions that involve operations that these firms establish in many different countries. But as time goes by and as technology enables to facilitate these transactions, we are going back to a situation in which all the exchange relations within and between companies can also be managed without having equity relations involved. So without establishing new companies, new subsidiaries, new affiliates in other countries. Okay? So there has been this sort of evolution. First, the international business environment has started with just import and export spot activities. Then we have witnessed the surge of foreign direct investment, with companies being able to establish their subsidiaries here and there in different countries. And I'm sure you can imagine how difficult it is and how resource consuming it is to establish new operations in many different countries. Now, what we are observing nowadays is that companies increasingly make use of advanced technologies in order to avoid being involved in such a difficult, in such a high commitment kind of activities as foreign direct investment. And they increasingly rely on relationship, on network relationship that are more flexible and still enable to take advantage of the opportunities that arise from international markets. So this is going to be something that we will explore in higher detail in the next lessons. Now, of course, one introductory lesson in a course of international management cannot be concluded without defining the concept of globalization. So I think we should start to at least list a number of concepts that come to our mind when we talk about globalization. Which are the concepts that this word stimulate in our thoughts? Yes?
Standardization.
Standardization. What do you mean by standardization, and what is the relationship with globalization?
In order to have what it is globalized, we also have to uniformize for example, the law of our state has to be more similar to the one of another state in order to better communicate and in order to, to support the transaction between the two countries.
Okay, very good. So your colleague say that if we want to live in a world that is more globalized, it is important that different countries become more uniform in terms, for instance, of their legal framework or the general rules that define the way companies interact with each other. Okay? And this is what she called standardization. But I would say, do we really need and do we really want to live in a world that is more globalized? So the answer of your colleagues as a sort of, is based on a sort of assumption that globalization is good, right? And I want to take the opportunity of your colleagues' answer to say something very important. I don't think we should have within our objectives of this course the objective of saying and concluding whether or not globalization is good or bad. Okay? This is something that has to do with the way we think about ethics, the way we think about professional behaviors within companies, the way we think about the professional, let's say, behavior that everybody, each of us, can use and can implement as a manager or maybe even as a consumer. But what is very important in this course is to understand that globalization is certainly a process. So it's not an event, it's not something that is irreversible, and it's not something that is finished, okay? It's not a condition that we can take for granted. And the answer of your colleague, I think, was very interesting in setting the boundaries of globalization. If we want to be more globalized, meaning that we can still be more globalized in principle, this answer gives us an idea of the fact that globalization is a process, is ongoing, is not a condition that we can take for granted, okay? And that's extremely important. This is probably the single most important thing that I would like you to remind about globalization. It is a process. It is ongoing, and I think what is happening in our world today confirms this idea of globalization as a process. We've been dealing with a world that has been for some time more and more homogeneous, for instance, in terms of legal settings and legal frameworks, for instance, in terms of the agreements among different countries for exchanging goods or services. And what we observe in the last few years is that a country like the US, which has been a very powerful engine of this process of economic integration, is now, starting to raise some new barriers to the economic integration, right? What do I refer to? What do I refer to with the idea of the US slowing down the process of economic integration? Yes? Sanctions. Yeah, sanctions, tariffs, right? And the idea of, raising up some costly barriers for companies, for foreign companies to be able to gain access to the huge and very attractive US market. So in a globalized world, which again is something that is not a fact, is not a condition, is not an event, we would not care. We would not be discussing of tariffs, okay, of quotas. But today, we are still, and again, discussing of these tools, and this makes the discussion about globalization and the need to monitor globalization extremely important. Something else, any other concept that comes to your mind when talking about globalization? Any concept when you think globalization is what? Or generates what? Or is driven by which kind of dynamic, which kind of trend, which kind of experience that you also felt as consumer maybe?
The efficiency of the market, because you can produce in a country that has lower costs of producing good, and so you have the final price product smaller than producing in the country of origin, so the efficiency of the market.
Okay, so your colleague associates the idea of globalization correctly with the idea of having the opportunity to rely on, let's say, raw materials or maybe components or other resources that are important for our production processes that are also much more efficient compared to those that are available in our domestic market. So your colleague says that globalization makes him think about the efficiency of market. And to some extent, this means that globalization opens up a number of opportunities, okay? Because in the past, in a world where distances were much more powerful in terms of setting boundaries to the type of markets to which companies could gain access to, all these opportunities were not available, okay? So it's good. Efficiency is certainly a good word to associate to globalization. Anything else?
Interdependency, I guess.
Interdependency is a great word. Why?
So, let's say you're a company that, I don't know, exports beans from Brazil, but if in Brazil there's some political shit and the prices go up, you're immediately affected yourself.
Okay, very good. So your colleague is saying that globalization drives interdependence. And interdependence is a situation in which two countries that in principles are autonomous, are independent from each other, okay? Let's say you are an Italian company and you source beans from Brazil, so you are basically linked just by an economic transaction. But in reality, what globalization generates is a situation in which basically if some sort of political event destabilizes Brazil, the Italian company that is sourcing beans from Brazil also immediately faces some economic consequences from depending on events that are taking place in a completely different countries, far, far away from your own country. Okay? And this again refers to the idea of monitoring that is extremely important for managers who have an international business approach to their companies. It's very important for managers to be informed of what is going on, even in very different contexts to which we might or might even not be related. Think about Brexit. Right? We've been talking about Brexit since a few years now. And as you can imagine, the reason why Brexit, the decisions of the UK to leave the European Union is so difficult to implement is precisely because the UK and the European Union are highly interdependent. You cannot really take away a piece of an interdependent system and think that the rest remains basically the same, and think that the relationship among these contexts, among these different contexts, will not be touched, will not be influenced. This is the reason why it's going to be very, very difficult to reach, let's say, an agreement, a practical agreement in terms of incorporating the UK from the European Union. So interdependence is another great word to explain globalization. As you see here from this slide, over time, in the different years in which I've been teaching an international management course, I had the opportunity to write down a few words that my students selected and you know, recalled when being asked what are the most important concepts of globalization. And some of these are those that you have just mentioned. And what we also came to talk about is the idea that globalization in, you know, the general debate that each of us can engage with can have either a positive or a negative interpretation. And this is something that we will leave out of our course, because what we really want to do is trying to understand what we can do with globalization and how globalization can affect our business in terms of threats and opportunity we can take. Let's now close this lecture with a definition, okay? A definition of globalization that to some extent we will use as a basis to build up the different blocks that we will be using in the definition and in the description of the international business environment. So we define economic globalization. This is very important. As we said, globalization might have positive, negative meanings. It may have a number of social implications, a number of cultural implications. We will discuss about this because these are, of course, very important. We cannot, just take them out of the picture. So we will definitely discuss the positive and negative implications of globalization from a societal, cultural viewpoint. But in terms of working with, let's say, relevant concepts for our theories and for our tools, we will work with economic globalization, okay? So we will mainly focus on the economic phenomenon of globalization, which can be certainly defined, as your colleague was mentioning, as a growing interdependence of locations, but most important economic actors, okay, across countries and regions. So we start from the idea and we build upon an environment in which what managers do in one company that is farther away can have a direct impact on our own business, on our own costs, on our own profits, and what the characteristics of consumers that buy products in very different, in very farther away markets can affect the way we market, we commercialize our product in different parts of the world, okay? As I also suggest you to remember, globalization is an ongoing process. It's not something that we should take for granted. As international managers, we have to learn to monitor the drivers of globalization, because globalization can be accelerated or decelerated by a number of events that certainly might have a number of consequences on our business. And so what we're going to do tomorrow is trying to understand what are the drivers and what are the type of events that as international managers we need to monitor, we need to take into account in order to understand how the reality, the international reality, can actually affect our world, our decisions, our strategies, okay? Okay, good guys, thanks for the attention. I'll see you tomorrow, and please check, do me this favor, check if the Moodle platform works, so tomorrow you can eventually tell me if anything is right or wrong, okay? Have a great day.